The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the Desert Valley storage facility as I stood among a crowd of bargain hunters, my hands sweaty despite the early morning hour. The auctioneer's voice echoed off the metal roll-up doors, calling out lot numbers with practiced efficiency. Unit 247 belonged to Harold Thompson, deceased, he announced. Starting bid at $50. I felt a pang in my chest. Harold had been my neighbor for 3 years, a quiet man in his 70s who kept to himself. I'd found his body 2 months ago when I noticed his newspapers piling up. Heart attack, the coroner said. No family, no will. Everything went to the state, including this storage unit he'd apparently rented for over 20 years. The echoes of that long night in the canyon still reverberated in my mind as we sat in the federal courthouse 3 months later. Outside, Phoenix stretched endlessly under its merciless sun, but something fundamental had shifted in the city's DNA. The corruption that had festered for 30 years was finally being excised, one arrest at a time. Agent Chen sat beside me in the witness waiting room, reviewing her testimony notes for what felt like the 100th time. The federal prosecutor had warned us that today would be the most important day of the trial. Kingsley's defense team was making their final push to discredit Harold's evidence and paint him as a delusional serial killer whose journals were the product of mental illness rather than documented fact. "You ready for this?" Chen asked, though I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. The past 3 months had been a whirlwind of depositions, safe house relocations, and late-night strategy sessions with prosecutors from 6 different states. The conspiracy had reached further than any of us had imagined. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, straightening my tie. It felt strange wearing a suit again. I'd spent so many weeks in borrowed clothes and FBI safe houses that normal life seemed like a foreign concept. Rodriguez appeared in the doorway, looking more confident than I'd seen her since this all began. The internal affairs investigation had cleared her of any wrongdoing, and she'd been promoted to head a new task force dedicated to rooting out corruption in law enforcement. "They're calling you in 5 minutes, Mark," she said. "The prosecutor thinks Kingsley's team is getting desperate. They're throwing everything they can at Harold's credibility." Through the courthouse windows, I could see protesters gathered on the steps, some demanding justice for the victims, others claiming the whole thing was a government conspiracy. The media attention had been relentless, but I'd learned to tune it out. What mattered was the truth, and Harold's meticulous documentation had provided that in devastating detail. As I walked toward the courtroom, I thought about the envelope I'd received the week before. It was from Patricia Morrison, Judge Morrison's widow. Inside was a simple thank you note and a photograph of her husband with their 2 children, taken just months before his murder. "Knowing the truth doesn't bring him back," she'd written, "but it gives us peace. Thank you for having the courage to see this through." The courtroom was packed, every seat filled with victims' families, journalists, and law enforcement officials. Kingsley sat at the defense table, his silver hair perfectly styled, his expensive suit immaculate. Even now, facing life in prison, he projected the confident bearing of a man who believed himself above the law. The prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Walsh, coincidentally no relation to Chen's murdered partner, guided me through my testimony with practiced precision. I recounted finding Harold's storage unit, the discovery of the evidence, the threats and pursuit, and finally the confrontation in the canyon. Every detail was supported by photographs, recorded phone calls, and Harold's own video confessions. When Kingsley's defense attorney cross-examined me, he tried to paint me as an opportunist who had manufactured evidence to claim Harold's hidden money. But the financial records were clear. Harold had set up the accounts years before I'd ever met him, and every transaction was documented with the same obsessive detail he'd applied to everything else. "Mr. Sullivan," the defense attorney said, "isn't it convenient that Harold Thompson chose you, a complete stranger, as his beneficiary? Doesn't that strike you as suspicious?" I looked directly at Kingsley as I answered. "Harold didn't choose me because he knew me well. He chose me because he'd researched me and determined I was honest, something the people who controlled him for 30 years couldn't understand, that there are still people who do the right thing simply because it's right." The testimony lasted 2 days. Chen's appearance was particularly powerful, as she described finding her partner's body and spending 28 years knowing something was wrong but being unable to prove it. When she played Harold's video confession about ordering Detective Walsh's murder, several jurors were visibly shaken. Rodriguez testified about the corruption within Phoenix PD, naming names and producing evidence of officers who had taken money to look the other way. Some had already pled guilty in exchange for cooperation, Others were still fighting the charges. But the most devastating testimony came from Dr. Elizabeth Harper, the therapist Harold had been seeing before his death. She testified about Harold's improving mental state, his growing clarity about his past, and his expressed desire to confess his crimes and expose the people who had controlled him. Mr. Thompson was not delusional, Dr. Harper testified. His medication had stabilized his condition significantly. He knew exactly what he was saying when he told me he'd been used as a weapon by powerful people. He was terrified of them, but he felt a moral obligation to tell the truth. The prosecution's case was methodical and overwhelming. Bank records showing payments to Harold, surveillance footage of Kingsley meeting with organized crime figures, phone records connecting the conspiracy to murders in other cities. Harold's hidden archive had contained enough evidence to bring down similar operations in Seattle, Miami, Denver, and 3 other metropolitan areas. During closing arguments, the prosecutor painted a picture of a decades-long conspiracy that had perverted the justice system in multiple cities. Harold Thompson was not a serial killer, she told the jury. He was a weapon, forged by mental illness and wielded by the defendants. When he outlived his usefulness, they discarded him. When he threatened to tell the truth, they silenced him forever. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned with guilty verdicts on all counts, the courtroom erupted. Kingsley showed no emotion as the judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The other defendants, police officials, organized crime figures, and political operatives, received sentences ranging from 25 years to life. Outside the courthouse, Chen and Rodriguez joined me on the steps. The protesters had been replaced by a gathering of victims' families, many of whom I'd met during the trial. Patricia Morrison was there, along with the families of the other Phoenix Strangler victims and the relatives of people killed in other cities. "What now?" Rodriguez asked as we watched the last of the news crews pack up their equipment. "Now we make sure this never happens again," Chen replied. She'd accepted a promotion to head a new FBI task force focused on corruption that crossed jurisdictional lines. "And we make sure Harold's sacrifice meant something." I'd made my own decision about the future. The $2 million Harold had left me was being donated to establish a foundation supporting mental health services for law enforcement and victim assistance programs. I was leaving real estate and going back to school to study criminal justice. If Harold's story had taught me anything, it was that ordinary people have a responsibility to stand up against corruption, even when it's dangerous. 6 months later, I stood in Harold's old storage unit, now empty except for dust motes dancing in the Arizona sunlight. The facility management had offered to let me keep the unit, but I'd declined. Some ghosts needed to be laid to rest. As I walked out of the Desert Valley storage facility for the last time, I thought about the chain of events that had started with a simple auction bid. Harold Thompson had spent the last years of his life trying to atone for 30 years of manipulation and murder. In the end, his meticulous documentation and careful planning had brought down a conspiracy that might have continued for decades more. The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly, just as it had that first morning when I'd opened Harold's storage unit. But now it felt different, not oppressive but cleansing. Phoenix was living up to its name, rising from the ashes of its corrupt past. Harold could finally rest in peace. Justice had been served, and I'd learned that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply refuse to look the other way when you encounter evil. The desert wind carried away the last of the dust as I drove toward my new life, leaving the shadows of the past behind me under Arizona's unforgiving but ultimately redemptive sun. 60, called out a woman with a notepad. 75, I counted, raising my hand. As a real estate agent, I knew the value of taking calculated risks. Storage auctions could be gold mines, antiques, collectibles, sometimes even valuable documents people forgot about. The bidding continued half-heartedly. Most of the serious buyers had already spent their money on the earlier units. When the hammer fell at $125, I was the winning bidder. "Congratulations, Mr. Sullivan," the auctioneer said, handing me the paperwork. "You've got 48 hours to clean it out." I walked toward Unit 247, my footsteps echoing in the concrete corridor. The facility was one of those older ones built in the 80s. Long rows of orange metal doors with simple padlocks. Nothing fancy, but it had served its purpose for decades. I cut the lock with bolt cutters I'd borrowed from my truck and rolled up the door. The metal screeched in protest, and I was immediately hit with the musty smell of old cardboard and dust. Sunlight streamed in, illuminating a space packed from floor to ceiling with boxes, furniture, and what looked like decades of accumulated belongings. "Jesus, Harold," I muttered, surveying the organized chaos before me. The old man had been methodical. Everything was labeled and stacked with military precision. Boxes marked kitchen items 1995, books, fiction, Christmas decorations, and dozens of others lined the walls. An old leather recliner sat in the back corner, and I could almost picture Harold sitting there surrounded by his memories. I started with the smaller boxes near the front, hoping to find something valuable enough to justify my investment. The first few contained exactly what their labels promised: kitchen utensils, books, holiday decorations that had seen better days, normal stuff from a normal life. It was when I moved the recliner to access the boxes behind it that I noticed something odd. The chair had been positioned to block a specific stack of boxes, all marked with the same label: Personal Files, HT, Private. My real estate training had taught me to pay attention to details, and this felt intentional. Harold had positioned that chair like a guard, protecting whatever was in those boxes from casual observation. I carried the first box outside into the sunlight and opened it carefully. Inside were manila folders, each meticulously labeled with dates ranging from 1992 to 1995. I opened the first folder and felt my blood run cold. Newspaper clippings, dozens of them, all about missing persons cases in Phoenix during the early 90s. But these weren't just random articles. Harold had circled names, written notes in the margins, connected cases with red string like something out of a detective movie. "Missing college student found dead," read one headline. "Third victim in serial case," announced another. Harold had documented everything about what the papers called the Phoenix Strangler, a serial killer who had terrorized the city for 3 years before suddenly stopping. I sat back on my heels, my mind racing. Why would Harold have collected all this? I flipped through more folders, finding photographs, crime scene photos that definitely weren't from newspapers. These were the kind of pictures only law enforcement would have access to. My phone rang, making me jump. The caller ID showed Phoenix PD, probably calling about some property dispute with one of my clients. "Mark Sullivan speaking. Mr. Sullivan, this is Detective Rodriguez with Phoenix PD. We understand you purchased Harold Thompson's storage unit at auction yesterday." My mouth went dry. "Yes, that's correct. Sir, we need to ask you not to disturb anything in that unit until we can send someone over to take a look. Mr. Thompson was a person of interest in some old cases." "What kind of cases?" I asked, though I was starting to have a terrible feeling I already knew. "I'd rather discuss this in person. Are you at the storage facility now?" I looked at the box of newspaper clippings at my feet, then at the stack of private boxes still waiting to be opened. "Detective, I think you need to get here right away. I've already opened some of the boxes, and what I've found, it's not good." 20 minutes later, Detective Rodriguez arrived with 2 other officers and a crime scene photographer. Maria Rodriguez was a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and graying hair pulled back in a tight bun. She took one look at the opened box and immediately called for backup. "Mr. Sullivan, I need you to step away from the unit and tell me exactly what you've seen." I explained about the newspaper clippings, the crime scene photos, and the methodical way Harold had organized everything. Rodriguez listened without interruption, taking notes on a small pad. "The Phoenix Strangler case," she said when I finished. 5 victims between 1992 and 1995, then nothing. Case went cold when the killings just stopped. She looked at me intently. "Mr. Thompson worked as a custodian at the Phoenix Police Department during those years. He had access to files, evidence rooms, crime scene photos. So he was helping with the investigation." Rodriguez's expression darkened. "That's what we thought at the time. Now we're not so sure." As the afternoon wore on, more officers arrived. They photographed everything before carefully removing box after box from the storage unit. I watched from behind yellow tape, a growing sense of dread settling in my stomach. "Detective," one of the officers called out, "you need to see this." Rodriguez disappeared into the unit for several minutes before emerging with a grim expression. She walked over to where I was standing. "Mr. Sullivan, I'm afraid this situation just became much more complicated. We found items that belonged to the victims, items that were never recovered as evidence." She paused, studying my face. "We also found detailed journals documenting the crimes, written in Harold Thompson's handwriting. The implications hit me like a physical blow. You're saying Harold was the killer. We're saying that's a very strong possibility, which brings us to our next problem." Rodriguez pulled out her phone and showed me a text message. "This was sent to the department's tip line an hour ago. The new owner of Unit 247 has seen too much. Some secrets should stay buried. I felt the blood drain from my face. Someone's threatening me. It appears so. Mr. Sullivan, Harold Thompson may have been the Phoenix Strangler, but he's been dead for 2 months. Someone else knew about this storage unit, knew what was in it, and they've been watching. As if to emphasize her point, my own phone buzzed with an incoming text from an unknown number. Walk away from the storage unit and forget what you saw. You have 24 hours to leave Phoenix. Don't test us. Detective Rodriguez saw my expression change and looked at my phone screen. Looks like we need to get you somewhere safe, she said grimly, because whoever sent that message killed Harold Thompson to keep him quiet, and you just became their next problem. The sun was setting over Phoenix, painting the storage facility in shades of orange and red that reminded me uncomfortably of blood. As police officers continued to process the scene, I realized my simple storage auction purchase had just turned into a fight for my life. I spent that night in a safe house, a nondescript apartment complex in Tempe where Detective Rodriguez assured me I'd be protected while they processed the evidence from Harold's storage unit. Sleep was impossible. Every car that passed, every footstep in the hallway, every creak of the building settling made me jump. At dawn, Rodriguez arrived with coffee and the grim expression of someone who'd been up all night. "We need to talk," she said, settling into the chair across from my couch. "The lab worked through the night processing what you found." I sat up, running my hands through my hair. "How bad is it?" "Harold Thompson was definitely the Phoenix Strangler," she said without preamble. "The journals you uncovered contain details about each murder that were never released to the public, details only the killer would know." She pulled out a tablet and scrolled through crime scene photos. "But here's what doesn't make sense. Harold documented everything, including his own doubts about continuing." She showed me a scanned page from one of Harold's journals. March 15th, 1995. "This has to stop. The voices are getting louder, more insistent. I can't tell if they're in my head or if someone is actually giving me instructions. The woman in the red car was there again yesterday watching my apartment. Someone was controlling Harold," Rodriguez continued. "These weren't the actions of a typical serial killer. He was following orders, and whoever was giving them is still alive." My phone rang. The same unknown number from yesterday. Rodriguez nodded for me to answer, but gestured for me to put it on speaker. "Hello, Mark," came a woman's voice, smooth and confident. "I trust you had a restless night." "Who is this?" I demanded. "Someone who's been cleaning up messes for 30 years. Harold was supposed to take his secrets to the grave, but you had to go digging around in things that don't concern you." Rodriguez leaned forward, speaking loudly enough for the caller to hear. "This is Detective Rodriguez with Phoenix PD. We have this call on record, and we're tracing it right now." The woman laughed. "Detective Rodriguez, I remember you from the original investigation. Fresh out of the academy, so eager to solve the big case. You never were very good at seeing the bigger picture." "What bigger picture?" Rodriguez shot back. "Harold Thompson was a sick man, but he was useful. Mental illness made him suggestible, and certain people found that convenient. Politicians, businessmen, judges, they all had enemies that needed to disappear quietly. Harold provided a perfect cover." I felt sick to my stomach. "You're talking about contract killing. I'm talking about a service that certain powerful people required. Harold's psychological profile made him the perfect patsy. When he started having second thoughts in 1995, we simply stopped giving him targets and let him live quietly with his guilt." Rodriguez was frantically signaling to someone off-screen. "Why kill him now after all these years?" "Harold started talking to a therapist last year. Age and medication had cleared his mind somewhat, and he was beginning to remember details he shouldn't, details about the people who hired our services." My blood ran cold. "That's why you killed him." "Harold had a heart attack," the woman said smoothly. "Brought on by stress, according to the coroner. Sometimes guilty consciences can be fatal." "You're admitting to murder," Rodriguez said. "I'm admitting to nothing, but I am warning Mr. Sullivan one last time. Take the money you would have made selling Harold's belongings and use it to relocate, far from Phoenix, today." The line went dead. Rodriguez immediately got on her radio, coordinating with the tech team trying to trace the call. "They used a burner phone routing through multiple cell towers," she reported after a few minutes. "Professional-grade equipment." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Phoenix skyline. "Detective, I need to ask you something, and I need a straight answer." "Shoot." "How many people in the police department knew Harold had that storage unit?" Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment. "That's what I've been wondering all night. Harold's employment file shows he rented it in 1992, right when the killings started. But there's no record of us ever searching it after he left the force in 2001. Someone buried that information. It's looking that way, which means whoever's behind this has connections inside the department. She stood up and paced to the window beside me. Mark, I'm going to be honest with you. I can't guarantee your safety if you stay in Phoenix. These people have been covering their tracks for 30 years. They have resources, connections, and they've already killed at least 6 people that we know of. What about the evidence? Harold's journals, the photos, the victims' belongings. We'll build a case, but it's going to take time. Months, maybe years. And in the meantime, she gestured toward my phone. As if on cue, it rang again. Different number this time. Mr. Sullivan. The voice was male, older, with the authoritative tone of someone used to being obeyed. This is District Attorney Robert Kingsley. I understand you've become involved in some sensitive matters. Rodriguez's face went white. She knew the name. Everyone in Phoenix law enforcement did. Robert Kingsley had been the DA for over 20 years, a pillar of the community with political aspirations. Mr. Kingsley, I said carefully, I just bought some old boxes at an auction. Yes, and those boxes have created quite a stir. I want you to know that my office is prepared to offer you full immunity and witness protection in exchange for your cooperation. Cooperation with what? We believe Harold Thompson was being manipulated by organized crime figures. Turning over his materials to us would help us build a case against some very dangerous people. Rodriguez was shaking her head frantically and pointing to her phone screen. She'd typed a message. Don't trust him. That's generous, Mr. Kingsley, but I think I should stick with Detective Rodriguez and the Phoenix PD for now. There was a long pause. Mr. Sullivan, I'm afraid Detective Rodriguez may not have explained the full scope of this situation. Some of the people Harold named in his journals are still alive, still powerful, and they view you as a threat. The Phoenix Police Department, unfortunately, has been compromised. Rodriguez grabbed the phone from my hands. Kingsley, this is Rodriguez. Are you seriously suggesting my department can't protect a witness? Detective Rodriguez. Kingsley's voice turned cold. I'm suggesting that a custodian couldn't have accessed crime scene photos and evidence without help from sworn officers. Some of your colleagues have been taking money to look the other way for 30 years. The implication hung in the air like a toxic cloud. If Kingsley was right, then Rodriguez herself might not be trustworthy. But if Kingsley was involved in the cover-up, then cooperating with him would be signing my death warrant. My phone buzzed with a text message from yet another unknown number. This one contained a photo. Rodriguez shaking hands with a man in an expensive suit outside an upscale restaurant. The timestamp showed it was taken 3 days ago, before I'd even bought Harold's storage unit. Detective, I said slowly, showing her the photo. Want to explain this? Rodriguez stared at the image, her face cycling through confusion, recognition, and then horror. That's Vincent Carruthers. He's a defense attorney who's represented some major organized crime figures. She looked at me with desperate eyes. Mark, I swear to you, that meeting was about a completely different case. But whoever took this photo has been watching you for days, I finished, which means they knew this was coming before I ever opened Harold's storage unit. The pieces were falling into place, and the picture they formed was terrifying. Harold's death wasn't a panicked reaction to his therapy sessions. It was a carefully orchestrated plan. They'd killed him, waited for his belongings to go to auction, and now they were manipulating everyone involved to clean up the evidence. Detective, I think we need to get out of Phoenix, I said. Both of us, because if they're setting you up too, then nowhere in this city is safe. Rodriguez nodded grimly. I've got a friend in the FBI who's been wanting to take a look at some of Phoenix PD's old cold cases. Maybe it's time to make that call. As she dialed, my phone rang one more time, the woman's voice from earlier, but now she sounded angry. Mr. Sullivan, you're making this much more complicated than it needs to be. We offered you a clean exit. Now you've forced us to consider more permanent solutions. Are you threatening to kill me? I'm explaining reality. You've seen evidence that could destroy careers, end political ambitions, and send several very powerful people to prison. Those people don't take chances. Then maybe they shouldn't have hired a serial killer. Harold Thompson was already killing when we found him. We simply gave his illness direction and purpose. When he outlived his usefulness, we let him fade away quietly. He could have died peacefully in his sleep if he'd kept his mouth shut. Rodriguez was back on her phone, speaking in urgent whispers to her FBI contact. Through the window, I could see unmarked cars beginning to circle the apartment complex. They've found us, I told the woman on the phone. Mr. Sullivan, you have 1 hour to walk out of that building alone and drive north on I-17. Take nothing with you except your wallet and car keys. There's a gas station called Desert Oasis at mile marker 247. Be there by 3 p.m. or Detective Rodriguez won't make it to her FBI meeting. The line went dead, and I turned to Rodriguez with a sick feeling in my stomach. They want to trade. Me for you. Rodriguez finished her call and looked at me with steely determination. FBI is sending agents, but they're 2 hours out. We can't wait. I'm not letting them hurt you because of my mess. Mark, this stopped being your mess the moment we realized Harold was being controlled. This is about 30 years of corruption and murder. She checked her service weapon and grabbed her car keys. We're leaving Phoenix, right now, together. As we prepared to run for our lives, I realized that buying Harold's storage unit hadn't just uncovered a serial killer's secrets. It had exposed a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of Phoenix's power structure. And now, we were both marked for death. Rodriguez's unmarked police cruiser roared through the streets of Phoenix as we weaved through afternoon traffic. In the rearview mirror, I could see at least 3 cars following us, black SUVs with tinted windows that screamed government or organized crime. How did they find us so fast, I asked, gripping the dashboard as Rodriguez took a hard right onto Van Buren. Same way they've stayed ahead of law enforcement for 30 years, she replied grimly. They have people everywhere. Her radio crackled and she turned it off immediately. Can't trust department communications. My phone rang. District Attorney Kingsley again. Don't answer it, Rodriguez said. We need to assume everyone with authority in this city is compromised until we can prove otherwise. We were heading east toward Scottsdale, but Rodriguez suddenly pulled into a shopping center parking lot and drove behind a row of stores. She parked between 2 delivery trucks and killed the engine. We can't outrun them in a car they can track, she said, pulling out her personal cell phone. But I've got an idea. She dialed a number and waited. Carlos, it's Maria. I need that favor you owe me. Yeah, the big one. Carlos Mendoza was Rodriguez's ex-husband, she explained while waiting for him to arrive. A mechanic who specialized in custom work for people who needed to disappear quickly, sometimes legally, sometimes not. He runs a shop that caters to witness protection cases and people fleeing abusive relationships, she said, completely off the books. 20 minutes later, a beat-up tow truck pulled behind the stores. Carlos was a stocky man in his 50s, with grease-stained hands and worried eyes. Maria, what kind of trouble are you in? He asked, loading her police cruiser onto his truck. The kind that gets people killed for asking questions, she replied. We need new transportation and a way out of the city that doesn't involve airports, bus stations, or rental car companies. Carlos nodded toward a modified van parked at his shop. Surveillance equipment, police scanner, encrypted communications. Previous owner was running from cartel enforcers. What happened to him? He made it to Canada. Far as I know, he's still alive. Rodriguez and I transferred our few belongings to the van, while Carlos worked on changing the license plates and VIN numbers. The FBI would be looking for us at the safe house by now, but Rodriguez's friend, Agent Sarah Chen, was someone she trusted completely. Chen worked organized crime in Los Angeles for 15 years before transferring to Phoenix, Rodriguez explained. She's been suspicious about certain cases getting buried or misdirected. My phone buzzed with a text message. Leaving the city won't save you. We have resources nationwide, last chance to cooperate. I showed it to Rodriguez, who cursed under her breath. They're not bluffing. If this conspiracy is as deep as it seems, they probably do have contacts in other cities. Carlos finished his work and handed Rodriguez a new set of keys. The van's registered to a shell company in Nevada. It'll take them weeks to trace it back to me, and by then the paperwork will have mysteriously disappeared. We drove north toward Flagstaff, staying off the main highways and using back roads Carlos had recommended. The desert landscape scrolled past the windows, red rock formations, sparse vegetation, and the occasional small town that looked like it had been forgotten by time. Rodriguez, I said after an hour of driving, I need to know something. That photo they sent of you with the defense attorney, what was that meeting really about? She was quiet for several minutes, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. Vincent Carruthers represents Antonio Vasquez, a crime boss we've been trying to build a case against for years. 3 weeks ago, Carruthers approached me with a deal. His client would provide information about corrupt police officers in exchange for immunity on some minor charges. And you believed him? I thought it was worth exploring. Vasquez has been untouchable because he always seems to know when we're coming. If he was willing to give up the cops on his payroll, she shook her head. Now I realize it was probably a setup. They wanted to make it look like I was compromised. My phone rang. Agent Chen this time. Detective Rodriguez gave me this number, came a crisp, professional voice. Are you Mark Sullivan? Yes. Mr. Sullivan, we have a problem. The safe house was firebombed 20 minutes after you left. Professional job, no witnesses, no evidence. If you'd been there. Rodriguez grabbed the phone. Sarah, it's Maria. How bad is it? Bad enough that I'm calling from a secure line and driving to meet you personally. These people aren't just trying to silence you. They're eliminating anyone who might have been exposed to the evidence. What do you mean? The auction house, where Mr. Sullivan bought the storage unit, burned down this morning. The auctioneer, the other bidders, 3 employees, all killed, made to look like an electrical fire. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. They killed everyone who was at that auction? Everyone except you, which tells me they want you alive for a reason. Rodriguez pulled over at a truck stop near Sedona. Agent Chen arrived 40 minutes later in an unmarked sedan, a tall woman with sharp features and the kind of alertness that comes from years of hunting dangerous people. She spread crime scene photos across a picnic table outside the truck stop's restaurant. The storage facility fire was arson, but expertly done. The auction house fire was sloppier. They were in a hurry, but the pattern is clear. They're eliminating witnesses and evidence. What about Harold's storage unit contents? I asked. Gone. The evidence room where we stored everything was broken into last night. Professional job. They knew exactly which boxes to take and left everything else untouched. Rodriguez slammed her fist on the table. 30 years of evidence just vanished. Not all of it, Chen said quietly. She pulled out a tablet and opened a video file. I had a feeling something like this might happen, so I spent all night photographing Harold's journals before they disappeared. The video showed page after page of Harold's meticulous handwriting, documenting not just the murders he'd committed, but the people who had directed him to specific targets. Look at this entry from April 1994, Chen said, pausing the video. The man in the expensive suit says the judge needs to disappear before the Hendricks trial. He showed me photos of Judge Morrison's house, his routine, his family. Said if I don't do it, they'll hurt my sister in Tucson. Judge Morrison, Rodriguez whispered. He was killed in a home invasion that year. The case that established Robert Kingsley's reputation as a tough-on-crime prosecutor. Chen nodded grimly. And here's an entry from 2 months later. Kingsley himself came to see me, said I did good work with the judge, gave me $5,000 and the address of a union leader who's been causing problems for some construction companies. The pieces were falling into place. Robert Kingsley hadn't been fighting organized crime. He'd been working with it, using Harold as a weapon to eliminate inconvenient people, while building his own political career on the resulting prosecutions. How many people did they have Harold kill? I asked. Based on these journals, at least 12 over 3 years. The 5 victims we attributed to the Phoenix Strangler were just the ones that fit the serial killer profile. The others were made to look like robberies, accidents, domestic violence. My phone buzzed with another text. Agent Chen's involvement changes nothing. We've been monitoring FBI communications for years. You have until midnight to surrender yourself, or we start killing people you care about. How do they know you're here? I asked Chen. She was already on her phone checking something. Because I made a mistake, she said grimly. I used my bureau phone to call in the safe house bombing. If they have someone inside the FBI monitoring communications, a black helicopter appeared on the horizon, flying low and fast toward our location. Time to go, Rodriguez said, gathering up the photos. We ran for the van as the helicopter circled overhead. Chen followed in her sedan, and we headed north on Highway 89 toward Flagstaff. The helicopter kept pace, but didn't take any aggressive action. They were tracking us, waiting for something. They don't want to kill us yet, Chen said over the radio. They need something from us first. What could we possibly have that they want? I asked. Rodriguez was studying the rearview mirror. Harold must have had insurance, something he hid that we haven't found yet. As if in response to her words, my phone rang with a call from beyond the grave, Harold Thompson's own cell phone number. I answered with shaking hands. Hello? Mr. Sullivan, came Harold's voice, thin and reedy, but unmistakably his. If you're hearing this message, it means I'm dead and someone has found my storage unit. It was a recording, but perfectly timed to our situation. I programmed my phone to send this message if it didn't receive a specific code from me every 30 days. I knew they would eventually kill me when I became too much of a liability. Rodriguez was frantically signaling for me to put it on speaker. The evidence you found in my storage unit is only part of the story. I made copies of everything and hid them somewhere safe, along with video recordings of my meetings with the people who controlled me. If you want to survive, you need to find what I hid before they find you. The message continued with specific directions to a location in the mountains outside Flagstaff, an old mining claim Harold had inherited from his father. They don't know about this place, Harold's voice continued. I made sure of that. But be careful who you trust. The corruption goes deeper than you can imagine, and they have people in law enforcement at every level. The message ended, and we drove in silence for several minutes, processing what we'd heard. Her dead man's switch, Chen said finally. Harold was smarter than they gave him credit for. Or more paranoid, Rodriguez added. But either way, he might have just saved our lives. As we drove toward the mountains, the helicopter fell back and disappeared. Either they'd lost us in the terrain, or they were setting up an ambush at Harold's hidden location. Either way, we were about to find out if a dead serial killer could help us bring down a conspiracy that had been 30 years in the making. The abandoned mining claim was tucked into a narrow canyon 40 miles northeast of Flagstaff, accessible only by a dirt road that hadn't seen maintenance in decades. Harold's directions led us through a maze of switchbacks and rocky terrain that would have been impassable in anything less robust than Carlos's modified van. No wonder Harold felt safe hiding things here, Agent Chen said, wincing as we bounced over another pothole. You'd need serious off-road equipment just to find this place. The sun was setting behind the canyon walls, casting long shadows across the desert scrub. According to Harold's recorded message, we were looking for an old mine shaft marked with a cairn of white stones, something his father had built decades ago as a landmark. There, Rodriguez pointed to a pile of bleached rocks about 50 yards up a steep slope. That has to be it. We parked the van in a cluster of boulders that would hide it from aerial surveillance and climbed toward the mine entrance. The shaft had been sealed with concrete and steel bars, but Harold's message had mentioned a hidden entrance 30 feet to the east. Behind a screen of desert sage, we found a narrow opening that had been carefully concealed with fitted stones. Inside, a modern LED light system illuminated a small chamber that Harold had transformed into a secure archive. Jesus, I breathed, looking at the setup. Multiple filing cabinets, a computer system with backup drives, and what looked like a video recording studio filled the space. Chen immediately went to the computer and began powering up the system. Professional-grade equipment. Harold wasn't just collecting evidence, he was documenting everything. Rodriguez opened the first filing cabinet and whistled low. Financial records, meeting transcripts, surveillance photos going back 30 years. She held up a folder marked Kingsley, Robert, 1995-2020. Look at this. The folder contained photographs of District Attorney Kingsley meeting with known organized crime figures, photocopied bank records showing suspicious deposits to offshore accounts, and detailed notes about cases that had been mysteriously dropped or misdirected. Harold was building a RICO case, Chen said, scanning through computer files. Racketeering, conspiracy, murder for hire. He documented everything. I found a folder with my own name on it, dated just 2 months ago. Inside were photos of my house, my real estate office, even copies of my financial records. They've been planning this since before Harold died, I realized. They knew his storage unit would eventually go to auction, and they wanted to control who bought it. But why you specifically? Rodriguez asked. Chen had found Harold's video files and was playing them on multiple monitors. Maybe this will explain it. The first video showed Harold in this same chamber, but he looked healthier, more alert than the frail man I'd known as my neighbor. My name is Harold Thompson, his recorded image said. Today is March 15th, 2023. If someone is watching this, it means the people who controlled me for 30 years have finally decided I'm too dangerous to keep alive. The video continued with Harold explaining how he'd been recruited in 1992, when his mental illness and financial problems made him vulnerable to manipulation. Robert Kingsley approached me personally, Harold said on screen. He knew about my psychological issues from my personnel file at the police department. He offered me money, protection for my sister in Tucson, and medication that would help control my symptoms, in exchange for occasional favors. The favors, Harold explained, started small, breaking into houses to plant evidence, intimidating witnesses, destroying police reports. But as Kingsley's political ambitions grew, so did the demands. They gave me targets, Harold continued. Judge Morrison, because he was going to expose corruption in city contracts. Union leader Frank Hendricks, because he was investigating safety violations at construction sites. City Council member Patricia Wells, because she was asking questions about police department budgets. Each name Harold mentioned corresponded to one of the Phoenix Strangler's supposed random victims. But they made a mistake in 1995, Harold's recorded voice said. They ordered me to kill Detective Sarah Chen's partner, Detective Jim Walsh. Walsh had been investigating connections between organized crime and political corruption. They said he was getting too close to something important. Rodriguez and I both turned to stare at Agent Chen, who had gone pale. Jim Walsh, Chen said quietly. My partner when I was a rookie detective in Phoenix. He was killed in what looked like a random street robbery in 1995. Harold's video continued. But Detective Walsh had shared his suspicions with his partner, Detective Chen. After Walsh died, she kept asking questions, kept pushing the investigation. They realized they'd made the problem worse instead of solving it. That's why you transferred to the FBI, Rodriguez said to Chen. You never believed Jim's death was random. And now you know why, Chen replied grimly. I've been investigating Phoenix corruption for 28 years, ever since Jim died. Harold's video explained that after Walsh's murder, the conspiracy had scaled back their operations. Instead of using Harold for high-profile kills, they limited him to transients, prostitutes, and others, whose deaths wouldn't attract attention. The 5 victims eventually attributed to the Phoenix Strangler. In 1995, they told me I'd served my purpose, Harold said. Kingsley gave me a choice, disappear quietly and never speak about what I'd done or join my victims. I chose to disappear, but Harold hadn't really disappeared. He'd spent the next 28 years documenting everything, building an insurance policy that would destroy the conspiracy if they ever came after him. The problem is, Harold's video concluded, I'm getting old, and my medication isn't working as well as it used to. Sometimes I remember things too clearly. My therapist says I should consider telling someone about my past, maybe finding a way to make amends. Chen paused the video. That's why they killed him. He was seeing a therapist and considering confessing. But why involve me? I asked. Why manipulate the auction so I'd buy his storage unit? Rodriguez found another folder, this one marked Sullivan, Mark, Asset Profile. Inside were detailed psychological evaluations, financial records, and what looked like a complete background investigation. You're a real estate agent with a reputation for honesty, she read from Harold's notes. No criminal record, no significant debts, no family in the area who could be used as leverage. But most importantly, your office handled the sale of Robert Kingsley's vacation home in 2019. The pieces clicked together. They needed someone clean to discover Harold's evidence, but someone they could control or discredit if necessary. And Kingsley knew you personally, Chen added. He could approach you directly, offer you a deal, make it seem like official cooperation with law enforcement, while simultaneously setting up Rodriguez to look corrupt and having backup plans to eliminate anyone who couldn't be controlled, I finished. We spent the next hour copying Harold's files onto encrypted drives Chen had brought. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Dozens of murders, hundreds of cases thrown or misdirected, millions of dollars in illicit payments, and connections that reached into federal law enforcement. This isn't just about Phoenix, Chen said, reviewing financial records. They've been running similar operations in at least 6 other cities, using mentally ill or desperate people as weapons, then discarding them when they become liabilities. My phone rang. Kingsley again. Answer it, Chen said, but keep him talking while I trace the call. Mr. Sullivan, Kingsley's voice was no longer smooth and confident, you've forced us to accelerate our timeline considerably. What timeline is that, Robert? The one where you and your new friends disappear permanently. We know where you are, we know what you've found, and we know it won't matter. The evidence is already uploaded to multiple law enforcement agencies. I lied. Kingsley laughed. Mr. Sullivan, we've had people inside the FBI for 20 years. Agent Chen's communications have been monitored since she left Los Angeles. We know exactly what evidence you have and where you plan to send it. Chen's face went white as she realized the implications. Which brings me to our final offer, Kingsley continued. Bring Harold's files to the Desert Vista Hotel in Flagstaff by midnight. Come alone, and Detective Rodriguez and Agent Chen will be allowed to live. Refuse, and all 3 of you will die tonight, along with Agent Chen's daughter in Los Angeles and Detective Rodriguez's sister in Tucson. The line went dead. Through the mine entrance, we could see lights moving in the canyon, vehicles approaching our location. How many people do you think they brought? I asked. Rodriguez was checking her weapon and gathering ammunition, probably enough to make sure there are no survivors this time. Chen was frantically working on her computer, uploading Harold's files to secure servers. I can get this evidence to people I trust, but I need 20 minutes. We might not have 20 minutes, I said, looking at the approaching lights. As if to prove my point, the sound of helicopters echoed through the canyon, not one this time, but several. They're not taking any chances, Rodriguez said grimly. This ends tonight, one way or another. I looked at Harold's final video message, still paused on the computer screen. A sick, manipulated man who had spent his final years trying to make amends for 30 years of horror. Then let's make sure Harold didn't die for nothing, I said, and let's end this conspiracy once and for all. The lights were getting closer and the sound of helicopters was getting louder. We had minutes to decide. Run and hope Chen could get the evidence to safety, or fight and risk everything on one final confrontation. Either way, after 30 years of corruption and murder, the Phoenix conspiracy was about to face its reckoning. The tactical teams moved through the canyon like shadows, their night vision equipment giving them a significant advantage in the darkness. From our position inside Harold's hidden archive, we could see at least a dozen armed figures positioning themselves around the mine entrance. Professional military contractors, Agent Chen whispered, studying their movement patterns through a gap in the rocks. Not local police or even federal agents. Kingsley brought in mercenaries. Rodriguez was monitoring police radio frequencies on the van's scanner. Complete radio silence from Phoenix PD. Either they don't know this is happening, or they've been ordered to stay away. Chen's computer chimed softly. The file upload was complete. Harold's evidence is now stored on secure FBI servers in 3 different states, she reported. Even if we don't make it out, the truth will surface eventually. Eventually might not help us right now, I said, watching the tactical teams tighten their perimeter. My phone buzzed with a text message. Mr. Sullivan, you have 5 minutes to exit the mine with your hands visible. Your friends can stay inside. This is between you and us. They still want me alive, I realized. There must be something they need that only I can provide. Rodriguez shook her head. It's a trap. Once you're in the open, they'll eliminate all of us. Maybe, I said, thinking through our limited options. Or maybe there's something about this situation they're not telling us. Chen had been reviewing Harold's financial records on her tablet. Mark, look at this, she said urgently. Harold didn't just document the conspiracy. He was embezzling money from them. She showed me bank records indicating that Harold had been skimming funds from the payments Kingsley and his associates had made over the years. Small amounts at first, but eventually totaling over $2 million. He was building a retirement fund, Chen continued. But look at the account beneficiary. The name on the account made my blood run cold. Mark Sullivan. Harold left everything to you, Rodriguez said incredulously. Not just the evidence, the money too. But I barely knew him. Why would he? Chen found Harold's explanation in a video file labeled Final Instructions. Mr. Sullivan, Harold's recorded voice said, if you're watching this, you've probably discovered that I've made you the beneficiary of certain financial accounts. This money was stolen from the people who controlled me. Call it restitution for 30 years of forced servitude. The video continued. But more importantly, I chose you because you remind me of the person I might have been if mental illness and desperation hadn't made me vulnerable to manipulation. You're honest, hard-working, and you care about doing the right thing. They need the account numbers, I realized. Harold must have hidden the banking information somewhere they can't access it. Rodriguez was studying a schematic Harold had drawn of the mine complex. There's another chamber deeper in the mine. If Harold hid something else, before she could finish, spotlights blazed through the mine entrance, temporarily blinding us. This is Robert Kingsley, came a voice amplified by a bullhorn. Mr. Sullivan, you have something that belongs to us. We're prepared to negotiate. I looked at Chen and Rodriguez. Both were ready to fight, but we were outgunned and outnumbered. Sometimes the only way to win was to change the rules of engagement. I'm coming out, I called back, but I want to talk to you face to face. I crawled through the mine entrance with my hands visible, squinting against the spotlights. Kingsley stood about 30 yards away, flanked by armed men in tactical gear. Even in the harsh artificial light, he looked every inch the distinguished politician. Silver hair, expensive suit, and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to power. Mr. Sullivan, he said as I approached, you've caused us considerable inconvenience. Just returning the favor, I replied. 30 years of murder and corruption deserves a little inconvenience. Kingsley smiled coldly. Harold Thompson was a mentally ill man who killed innocent people. We simply guided his illness toward more productive targets. Productive for who? Your political career? Your business associates? For the city of Phoenix, Kingsley said smoothly. Do you have any idea how much crime we prevented by eliminating key figures in organized crime, corrupt officials and troublesome activists? Harold may have killed 12 people, but we saved hundreds of lives. It was a sociopath's logic, justifying murder as public service. What about Detective Walsh? Judge Morrison? The union leader? Necessary sacrifices. Walsh was going to expose operations that were keeping Phoenix safe from major organized crime families. Morrison was taking bribes from those same families. The union leader was covering up safety violations that would have killed dozens of workers. And you decided their fate without trials, without evidence, without any legal process. Kingsley shrugged. The legal process is slow and corrupt. Sometimes direct action is more effective, like firebombing auction houses and killing innocent people, like protecting a system that has kept Phoenix from becoming Detroit or Baltimore. Kingsley stepped closer. Mr. Sullivan, I'm going to make you the same offer I made Harold 30 years ago. Work with us and you'll be rewarded. Fight us and you'll be eliminated. What exactly are you offering? Harold stole $2 million from us over the years. Money that funded operations in 6 different cities. We want it back, but we're prepared to let you keep half as payment for your cooperation. Cooperation with what? Harold documented everything, but he also implicated himself in 12 murders. His evidence is a double-edged sword. It could destroy us, but it would also destroy his reputation and hurt the families of his victims. We're offering to let you present a sanitized version of events. Harold was the Phoenix Strangler acting alone. No conspiracy, no political corruption, no uncomfortable questions about law enforcement failures. I pretended to consider the offer while looking for weaknesses in their positions. And if I refuse, then you'll have a tragic accident just like Harold did. Agent Chen and Detective Rodriguez will be found dead in what appears to be a shootout with unknown assailants. The evidence will disappear, and life goes on. Except you can't make Harold's evidence disappear anymore, I said. Agent Chen already uploaded everything to secure FBI servers. Kingsley's confident expression flickered. Agent Chen has been under surveillance for years. We know exactly which servers she used, and we have people who can delete those files within hours. What about the copies I made? What copies? I smiled. While you've been focused on Harold's archive, I've been busy. Harold's banking information, his video confessions, financial records of your conspiracy. I've hidden copies in locations you'll never find. It was a bluff, but Kingsley's reaction told me it was an effective one. Where? He demanded. Insurance policy, I replied. If anything happens to me, Chen or Rodriguez, those copies get released to every major news outlet in the country. Kingsley was conferring with his men in urgent whispers. I could see their confidence beginning to crack. You're lying, he said finally. Am I? Harold spent 28 years planning for this moment. Do you really think he wouldn't have taught me a few tricks about staying alive? From inside the mine, I heard the sound of a small explosion. Flashbang grenades. Kingsley's men were moving on Chen and Rodriguez. Insurance policies work both ways, Mr. Sullivan, Kingsley said coldly. Your friends have just been neutralized. Now you're going to tell me exactly where you hid those copies. But he'd made a crucial mistake. While his attention was focused on me, he hadn't noticed Agent Chen slipping out of the mine through Harold's back entrance. She was now positioned behind his tactical team with a clear shot at Kingsley himself. Robert Kingsley, Chen's voice echoed through the canyon, amplified by a bullhorn she'd taken from one of his vehicles. This is FBI agent Sarah Chen. You're under arrest for conspiracy, racketeering, and first-degree murder. Spotlights suddenly blazed from multiple directions, not Kingsley's lights, but FBI units that had been moving through the canyon while we talked. Did you really think, Chen continued, that I would come to a confrontation like this without backup? I've had federal agents surrounding this location for the past hour. Kingsley spun around, realizing he'd walked into a trap, but his tactical team was already laying down their weapons as FBI agents emerged from concealed positions throughout the canyon. This isn't over, Kingsley snarled at me. The corruption goes deeper than you know. Eliminating me won't change anything. Maybe not, I replied, but it's a start. As FBI agents placed Kingsley in handcuffs, Rodriguez emerged from the mine with a grim smile. The flashbangs were a nice touch, she said. But next time maybe warn us before you set up an elaborate sting operation. Chen walked over, looking satisfied but exhausted. 28 years, she said quietly. 28 years since they killed my partner, and finally we have them. What happens now? I asked. Now we take down a conspiracy that's been operating in multiple cities for 3 decades, Chen replied. Harold's evidence is going to destroy careers, end political ambitions, and send a lot of powerful people to prison. And the money Harold left me? That's between you and the IRS, Chen said with a slight smile, though I suspect you'll find a way to put it to good use. As we walked back toward the vehicles, I thought about Harold Thompson, a sick, manipulated man who had spent his final years trying to make amends for 30 years of horror. His storage unit hadn't just contained evidence of his crimes, it had contained his redemption. The Phoenix conspiracy was finally over, but the impact would be felt for years to come, and somewhere in the desert, Harold could finally rest in peace, knowing that his victims had received justice at last.